If I have a chance to see him, I'm forgiving him. I tell him daily that I never ever in my entire life been in his shop. I never ever buy any clothing from him. That he dealt with me very wrongly.
31,000 feet over Scotland, a clear December night. On a radar screen, a single point of light drifts calmly out toward the Atlantic. The controller watching it has followed this exact route dozens of times. It's routine, pure routine, until, in a single instant, that one point becomes 5. And then the 5 begin to drift apart, fanning out across the screen like something breaking open in total silence. The controller keys his radio. No answer. He calls again. Nothing. What just vanished from that screen isn't a signal. It's 259 people in the air, and on the ground below, 11 more who haven't yet looked up. 270 lives in all. 35 of them students, flying home for Christmas. It's December 21st, 1988. And you've just watched the deadliest terrorist attack in the history of the United Kingdom unfold in real time. This is the story of Pan Am Flight 103, and almost 40 years later, it still isn't closed, because this isn't just the story of a bomb, it's the story of an impossible investigation spread across more than 800 square miles of Scottish countryside that ended up hanging on a piece of plastic smaller than the nail on your little finger. It's the story of a man convicted of murdering 270 people, a man many people, even today, still believe was innocent. And it's the story of a second suspect who, as you're watching this video, is about to sit in front of a jury for the very first time, in 2026, nearly 4 decades on. Stick around to the end, because to understand why this case is still open, you have to start with the one thing everyone took for granted that night. That this was a completely normal flight, and it was. Pan Am 103 was as ordinary as flying gets. A Boeing 747 with an almost poetic name, Clipper made of the seas. It flew the transatlantic route from London to New York, with a final leg onto Detroit. In the cockpit sat a veteran captain with nearly 11,000 flying hours behind him. At 6:25 in the evening, the jet lifts off from Heathrow carrying 243 passengers and 16 crew, whole families, business travelers, servicemen heading home for the holidays, and that group of 35 American college students who'd spent a semester in Europe and were counting down the hours until they landed. For 38 minutes, absolutely nothing happens. The plane climbs, levels off, turns toward the ocean. The last thing anyone hears from the flight deck is a routine call. They ask for clearance to cross the Atlantic. 30 seconds later, the plane no longer exists. And here's the first detail that changes everything. Whatever destroyed that 747 wasn't in the cabin. It wasn't in the wings. It wasn't in the engines. It was down below, in the cargo hold. Inside a suitcase its owner never once stepped up to check in. At 7:03, the people of Lockerbie, a quiet town in the south of Scotland, just a few thousand residents, hear a roar in the sky that many of them mistake for thunder. It isn't thunder. It's an aircraft weighing more than 300 tons falling out of the dark in pieces. One of the wings, still heavy with fuel, slams into a residential street and detonates. The blast opens a crater so deep that several houses, with the families inside them, simply stop existing. Miles away, seismographs pick up the impact as a small earthquake. On the other side of town, the scene is different, and somehow even more haunting. The nose of the aircraft, the entire cockpit, comes down almost intact in a field and settles on its side in the grass. That image, the nose of the Clipper made of the seas lying in the middle of a Scottish field, will travel around the planet and become the symbol of the whole disaster. But for the first investigators who reach the scene that same night, that picture isn't an ending. It's the start of a nightmare. Because the wreckage of the plane isn't in one place. It's everywhere. The debris stretches across more than 800 square miles, chunks of fuselage, luggage, personal belongings, and yes, the victims too, are scattered through forests, over hills, and across gardens for miles in every direction. Overnight, it becomes the largest crime scene ever handled on British soil. Hundreds of police officers spread out over the land and comb it on foot, yard by yard, marking every single fragment they find with a little flag. And in the middle of that total chaos, someone picks up two small pieces of aluminum, blackened and twisted in a very particular way. They come from a luggage container in the forward left cargo hold, and that metal isn't just broken. It's punched through, bent outward from the inside, carrying the unmistakable signature of a shockwave. This wasn't a mechanical failure. It wasn't an accident. Someone put a bomb on that plane. And from that moment on, the question stops being what happened. The question becomes who. What comes next is one of the most astonishing pieces of forensic work of the entire 20th century. Investigators know the bomb traveled inside a suitcase in that hold. But they need to know which suitcase, what was packed around it, and where it came from. So they do something almost obsessive. They collect every scorched fragment, every scrap of fabric, every splinter of plastic scattered across the countryside. They haul it all into a hangar, and they start rebuilding the bomb and its suitcase like a million-piece jigsaw puzzle made of burned debris. And slowly, impossible things start to appear. Pieces of a brown Samsonite suitcase. Inside it, or what's left of it, the guts of a Toshiba radio-cassette player. And hidden within that, the explosive itself, Semtex, a Czech-made plastic explosive, odorless, impossible to sniff out, capable of tearing an airliner in half with less than a pound of material. But the decisive find is tiny. Embedded in a piece of burned shirt is a fragment of a circuit board about the size of a fingernail. That little green sliver is going to put names, a country, and a date in the dock. Although, and hold on to this, it's also going to plant the doubt that, almost 40 years later, still nobody has managed to lay to rest. Because the scientists pull off something extraordinary. They trace that fragment to a very specific type of timer, built by a small Swiss company, and the shirt it was buried in, they trace to a very specific clothing shop on a very specific island, Malta. Investigators fly out there, track down the shop owner, and the man remembers selling those exact garments to a customer with a Libyan accent. All at once, every road starts pointing in the same direction. According to the reconstruction, the suitcase with the bomb didn't get loaded in London at all. It supposedly began its journey in Malta, flew alone, with no passenger beside it, to Frankfurt, then on to London, and at Heathrow it was transferred onto Pan Am 103. A ghost suitcase crossing 3 airports with nobody traveling alongside it. And at the end of that trail stood an entire country, Libya. But this is where the story takes its first big turn, because for the first several months, investigators weren't looking at Libya at all. They were looking in a completely different direction. To understand that, you have to go back a few months. In July of 1988, an American warship shoots down an Iranian passenger jet by mistake over the Persian Gulf. All 290 people on board are killed. Iran swears revenge. So when, 5 months later, Pan Am 103 falls out of the sky, nearly everyone in Western intelligence thinks the same thing. This is Tehran's answer. Suspicion lands on a terrorist group backed by Syria and tied to Iran. And why them, specifically? Because of one chilling detail. Just 2 months before the attack, German police had broken up a cell of that very group inside Germany. And what did they find among the equipment? A bomb hidden inside a Toshiba radio-cassette player, rigged with a detonator that triggered based on altitude. In other words, the exact same kind of device that brought down Pan Am 103. The Germans seized 4 of these bombs, but they had reason to believe 5 had been built. 4 turned up. The 5th did not. Where was the 5th bomb? For a while, the answer seemed obvious, in the cargo hold of Flight 103. And yet that lead, so solid, so logical, was quietly set aside. The official investigation pivoted and locked onto Libya instead. Why? People have argued about that for more than 30 years. Critics point to an awkward political backdrop. In the early 90s, the United States was gearing up for the Gulf War and needed Syria and Iran on side, or at the very least staying out of the way. Pointing the finger at a group backed by Damascus and Tehran had become, let's say, politically inconvenient. Libya, on the other hand, was the perfect enemy. Defenders of the investigation reject all of that flatly and insist the forensic evidence simply led to Libya, plain and simple. But before you decide which side you're on, hang on, because what happens next makes it even messier. In 1991, Scottish prosecutors formally charged 2 Libyan men. The first is an intelligence officer who also happened to be head of security for the country's national airline. The second is the man who ran that same airline's operation at the airport in Malta. The problem is that Libya, ruled by Muammar Gaddafi, flatly refuses to hand them over. And a standoff begins that drags on for years. International sanctions slowly strangle the country until, in 1999, Gaddafi finally gives in. He agrees to surrender the 2 suspects, but with one extraordinary condition. They won't be tried in Scotland, and they won't be tried in the United States. The trial is held on neutral ground at a former military base in the Netherlands under Scottish law, with 3 judges and no jury at all. A legal arrangement with no precedent, built specifically for this one case. In January 2001, the verdict comes down. One of the 2 men is found not guilty and walks free. The other, Abdelbaset al-Megrahi, is found guilty of murdering all 270 victims and sentenced to life in prison. On paper, the Lockerbie case is closed. Justice at last. But if it were really closed, you wouldn't be watching this video. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe. Because Megrahi's conviction rested, in large part, on 2 pillars. The first was that fragment of the timer. The second was the memory of a Maltese shopkeeper who said he recognized him. And over the years, both pillars began to crack. The witness's identification kept shifting, wavering, contradicting itself. And the origin of that circuit fragment, the star piece of evidence, was called into question by experts who challenged exactly how, when, and where it had turned up. And the people who believe the wrong man was convicted aren't just conspiracy theorists. Some of them are relatives of the victims themselves. The best-known case is a British doctor who lost his 23-year-old daughter on that plane and who has spent the rest of his life trying to prove 2 things: that Megrahi was innocent and that the real lead, the one that pointed to Iran, was never followed all the way to the end. And then, in 2009, something happens that rips every wound back open at once. Megrahi is diagnosed with terminal cancer. Doctors give him around 3 months to live. And the Scottish government makes a decision that outrages half the world. It releases him on compassionate grounds and lets him return home to Libya.
To my friends in Scotland, the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, I praise their courage for having proved their independence in decision-making, despite the unacceptable and unreasonable pressures they faced.
For the American victims' families, it's a complete betrayal. And the footage that comes back from Tripoli only makes it worse. Megrahi steps off the plane and is welcomed like a hero, surrounded by flags and cheering crowds. The man convicted of the worst attack in British history, celebrated in his own country. But wait, because there's one last uncomfortable detail. The doctors had given him 3 months. Megrahi lived almost 3 years. He didn't die until 2012 in Tripoli, carrying whatever he truly knew to the grave. And with him, any hope of learning the full truth seemed to be buried too.
If I have a chance to see him, I'm forgiving him. I tell him daily that I never ever in my entire life been in his shop. I never ever buy any clothing from him. That he dealt with me very wrongly.
The key word there is seemed, because the story didn't end there. In 2011, the fall of Gaddafi cracks open archives, testimonies, and names that had been locked away for decades. And out of all of them emerges a third man. His name is Abu Aguila Massoud. And he wasn't a political figure, or a middleman, or a head of security. According to the prosecution, Massoud was the technician, the man who, allegedly, built the bomb with his own hands. For years, he was nothing more than a name in an intelligence file, until, in late 2020, the United States formally charges him. And in December 2022, Massoud is handed over to American authorities and flown to Washington. The centerpiece of the case against him is an alleged confession Massoud is said to have made to a Libyan investigator back in 2012, admitting he assembled the device. But his defense argues that confession was obtained under duress, that he was threatened and forced to lie. The trial has been pushed back again and again because of his fragile health and the sheer complexity of a case with evidence scattered across the globe. And here's the fact that turns this decades-old tragedy into today's headline. Jury selection is set for late August of 2026, which means that almost 38 years after that night over Lockerbie, for the very first time, a jury is going to sit in judgment over someone for what happened. And that's the real shadow Pan Am 103 leaves behind. That after nearly 4 decades, 2 separate investigations, a country accused and then forced to pay billions in compensation, and a man convicted whom many still believe was innocent, there still isn't a single version of events that absolutely everyone accepts. The bomb took a fraction of a second to go off. The plane took less than a minute to disappear from the sky. But the question of who pulled the trigger and of why certain leads were allowed to go cold is as alive today as it was in 1988. Maybe this trial will finally bring answers. Maybe it'll only open up more questions. Because if the Lockerbie case proves anything, it's that sometimes finding someone to blame and finding the truth are not quite the same thing. And if this story pulled you in, there's another tragedy in the sky where the big question wasn't who did it, but how far a human being is willing to go to stay alive. One plane, one impossible mountain range, and one decision that horrified the entire world. That video is waiting for you right here, and I promise you won't be able to look away. If you liked this video, subscribe. We drop videos like this all the time.